When I first came across your work, I had an immediate affinity with it because of the link to clothing and needlework. And when I thought about painting and what it is and can be today with contemporary art practices, I was considering my half Chinese heritage and embroidery, which is very much considered painting with the needle. And your singular practice, it works through traditional embroidery and contemporary painting and approaches to landscape. It offers us texture and color, but through this language of pattern and stitchery that is a veritable feast for the eye and the mind. So I thought perhaps we could start by talking about like how it began, how you came to this language and methodology.
Sure. That for me, I guess it of course goes back to being a member of the diaspora, Palestinian diaspora in this case. But I think I grew up in New York City, essentially Palestinian at home and in a very like American community, but also very like Jewish New York community and stuff. So I was kind of like all over the place in terms of, learning about the world, like as I was young and whatever. And then, at a certain age realized that, like the issue of Palestine and Israel was like very touchy and I like shouldn't talk about it and that whole thing. But as the years progressed and I got older and I lived in Europe for a little bit and whatever, I started to, really started to engage more with the topic. And I think by extension, or like at the same time as that, started to really feel like I was feeling an urge to connect with something Palestinian and kind of like figure out like how, like my heritage and how it is that I'm Palestinian, even though I feel so American and so on. And so I was really just looking for that connection to something Palestinian. And this kind of embroidery is very common in Palestinian homes around the world, also a lot of Arabs' homes in general. And so I had always been like a craft inclined kid. So I think it was just like a very almost obvious thing to try out because it was just so visceral. This kind of embroidery really just like screams Palestine and seemed like something up my alley. So I tried it out and like basically it became my medium, right? And I think that, on the ground level of it, it's also something about textiles in terms of like the quilt that your grandmother made or something where it has this meaning because of like who made it, but also like because of the hours and hours of work and attention and like it being in someone's hands and like somehow that being imbued like into the fabric. And so textile, that kind of meticulous craft and stuff just really felt like rich as like a medium to work with. And then of course Palestinian embroidery, the geometric patterns and the construction and the kind of compositions of how they traditionally use patterns and compose the patterns out of smaller symbols and stuff was just like kind of taking care of the other side of my brain. So there was like the sentimental side, and then there was like the kind of more like mathematical like patterns, like that kind of stuff, that it kind of hit those two things. And I think I feel like that's what you're referring to in terms of how what it is to look at the works, because at times you can just focus on the pattern and just get lost in like what's going on there, and then other times you see it as a landscape and as a painting. So yeah, so I mean it's been working for me, this medium, I guess. And I think what I mean by that also is that it's just like led me to a lot of different avenues of using it to make work. There's a lot to work with there, so.
I imagine, sort of with every stitch you make and the sound of, sort of the threads pulling through the cotton backing, like there's this, like inscription, right, of
Yeah.
that connection.
It's definitely repetitive.
Yeah.
it's not, it's funny though, because people, I feel like I'm often asked like, or people comment often like, oh, that must be so like relaxing and meditative to do that over and over again. And it's funny because it really isn't. Like, because when I'm making a piece, I'm focusing on executing the pattern and getting the shape, like which stitches go where kind of thing correctly. But at the same time have to pay attention to what color I'm using and form like the slope of a mountain or a circle for the sun or whatever. Um, so doing that at the same time, it's very easy to make mistakes and have to take,
Mhm.
I mean, it happens to me. It happens less and less as the years go on, but some pieces that are more challenging, I find myself messing up and have to take out like this much embroidery stitch by stitch. It takes as long to take it out as it does to put it in. And you have to like take it all back and then like get, because you've missed one stitch somewhere
Yes.
and then it set the whole thing off in the wrong, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's really not meditative, like crocheting or something where it's like that I find soothing like that. But this is like, yeah, it's,
Okay. It's a lot of concentration.
yeah, it's like, I mean, it's like a certain, like you can get going, but you have to still pay attention. And it's very easy for each stitch to have like a little extra twist of yarn that didn't pull through all the way or something. So you just have to like literally look at every single stitch as you're making it. Like it, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, I just, I started doing this 8 or 9 years ago, and I kind of keep waiting to be bored by it, but I'm just, the minute I finish one, I like can't
Ready.
wait to start the next one. And it's partly because I have an image in my head of like, I want to make a blue one with like this thing here, this green here, and this red here. And so I'm just like already in my head, like on to the next one. And so I just am itching to like get that started. Then I remember after I had my first show of the landscapes, which was only in 2017, um, I was waiting to feel exhausted by the embroidery, like as I finished the first like solo exhibitions amount of work. I was just expecting to be like, I need a break, but I really didn't. So yeah, so knock on wood, I'm like still going with the embroidery.
Wow.
Um, but yeah.
I really enjoyed the essay that Kaylin Wilson Goldie wrote
Oh
on
yeah.
your work for the book, which will be coming out in September. And I learned about your collection of traditional Palestinian dresses, and in particular the embroidered chess pieces and the one dress that kind of launched the series of paintings.
Right. For
Was
the
that sort of the kind of the foray into, or was it
um
parallel?
I think that okay, so I started working with the embroidery long before I ever started like officially like starting to buy antique
Okay.
dresses, stuff like that. But I did a project at Frieze, New York in, I think, was it 2018? Maybe, I don't know. That was that I had bought a bunch of pillows in Palestine just from women. Like I started to work with embroiderers there. And and a lot of the embroiderers are just women who do this on the side and they sell their stuff they make at markets or whatever. And so if they meet anyone to like potentially do some commissions or something, they always bring like a suitcase full of stuff that they're also, you can just buy.
Hmm.
And so I bought like a whole bunch of stuff from them, and that included a bunch of pillows that were embroidered. And that turned into a body of work for Frieze New York, where I remade the pillows exactly following the pattern as it was originally done by each woman. And side note is that each pillow then would be individual to that woman. She decided what border, what pattern to put here, what pattern to put there. Like it's a library of patterns that everyone uses, but at the same time, how to lay them out is like up to each individual. And so these pillows are not like a standard design. There's no such thing as like a really standard design. It's just like standard patterns and people make their own designs. And so I replicated each pillow and embroidered it again exactly how big the original pillow was. But instead, of course, basing off the women's color palette they happened to choose when they made the original pillow, I made a landscape scene with a similar color palette and using the same exact pattern, but obviously with this landscape effect. And so that was the first time that I was using like artifacts from Palestine essentially to kind of give birth to like a whole body of painting, so to speak. And the black dress that you're referring to, the project for the ADA show in this past February in New York, was an idea that I had also for years. And I bought those dresses around the same time I bought those pillows. But the project actually happening came 2 years later than the pillows, but it was the same idea. So take a dress, it has a heavy panel in the chest of embroidery. It has heavy panels on the kind of shin down around the whole bottom of the dress. And then it has like patterns down the sleeves and around the cuffs and around the shoulders. And so I basically made that body of work where the pattern for the chest panel and the colors inspired a piece that replicated exactly that patterning layout. So essentially like deconstructed to the dress into, I think it was like 8 pieces of like 8 paintings on the wall. And yeah, so that, I mean, and as I said, I bought those dresses knowing that like one of them was gonna, like when I was looking for those dresses, I came across an antique dealer in Jerusalem, which is where you would like buy these dresses. They sell like antique furniture and also textiles and stuff. And he let me into the storeroom and I could dig through all these dresses, like a room stacked with like 100 dresses folded up. And I could just go through them looking for like dense enough pattern to be able to get the effect of painting that I do. Of course, because if the pattern is too like sparse, then the lines won't really read nicely. So you need like a very evenly dispersed pattern. Anyway, so I had bought those dresses years before, knowing that one of these days I was gonna do this project. And then with James Cohan Gallery, yeah, we finally did it, and we built this table that had the dress in it that was like part table, part glass case. So like a little bit archive vibe, a little bit museum vibe, a little bit like, I don't know. I'm really happy with how the presentation turned out.
Like
But
it's like a vitrine, but it's also kind of like a treasure chest. It's sort of
right.
like this kind of special thing that you
And
can.
honestly, there's something about a human form, like a dress there that is a little like coffiny a little bit, but it can be all those things. But and you know, and what was different about that body of work as well is that they were on black fabric, which is not what I usually do. But since the original dress was on black fabric, I thought like, let's go for the exact look of this dress. So yes, that was a great project. And now, yeah, I mean, now it's on to other things. But
And what you sort of sharing with us through that story is how you encountered your collaboration with women in the West Bank city of Ramallah.
right.
So was it through that sort of encounter with the women in the pillows that you
Well,
developed
yeah,
a relationship
yeah.
for future collaborations?
So essentially, yeah, I met them back then. This was like 2000, I think it was early 2017, and started commissioning them to make embroideries for me on not on like pillow fabric, but on the same fabric that I use for my pieces. And the first, it was, but it's like, I mean, the women who do this embroidery in Palestine aren't what we would consider professional in the same way. Like, they don't work for a production house that makes Palestinian embroidery. Each woman is a producer herself. That involves her own creativity, but she does it at home. You know what I mean? In between the other stuff she does all day. And it usually starts by making their own dresses and stuff for their own house, and then expands to neighbors and whatever, people in the community. You make someone a wedding dress, you make someone some pillows for their house or whatever. And then of course, like in modern day, it also means like making some extra pillows for tourists, like markets and stuff. So they're professionals in that sense, but it's essentially like if your mom, you know, has a craft hobby that she sells at the local market. You know what I mean? It's not really like a production company or something. And so the process of working with them, I knew like I had to start slow. And so the first thing I did with them was that pillow project where I had them remake pillows that they had already made, but just not turn them into pillows. They became paintings where it was these pieces were also in the Frieze body of work. And it was like the ones I made were landscapes, and the landscapes that I made were based off the color palettes of the original pillows. But then part two of that was that I took the design of the original pillow, and with the color palette that was in that original pillow, I rearranged the color palette into like blocks of color, so it wasn't going along with the pattern, like each flower one color and so on. And I had the women re-embroider it in this like color block style. And so that was the first. It was kind of like building up a system where at first that was a way for us to figure out how I needed to plan the patterns and how I needed to make the PDF and what kind of information I needed to include, how I needed to deliver the design information to them so that they could produce it for me. Once we figured that out, we moved on to, I feel like you've seen, including the piece that's in the exhibition, are pieces that have Palestinian embroidery by the women, but when they do their part, there's empty spaces in the pattern that I'm planning on embroidering myself once I get them back. So I will create a body of work in terms of patterns and colors and stuff, that I, plan it in terms of how many pieces, what size they are, all that stuff. Send those patterns to the women. A few months will go by and they'll produce them. And then when I get them back, it's my turn to do my landscape embroidery in the empty spaces and kind of finish the piece. And some of them I specify color. There are other times when I just say, pick 2 colors, pick 3 colors. And I always just ask them to do it Palestinian style, whatever that means to them. And it's really because I want to try to capture in the part of the embroidery that they do, I want to try to capture like a living cultural practice, like the styles and the aesthetics that are in vogue, like in Palestine, in their community right now. And so I don't literally want to commission something and tell them exactly what it's going to look like. So I will give them the pattern, but not the colors. Or even when I do give them the colors. So when I have the most control, it's when I say, I want this piece to be red and blue and black. Even then, I don't tell them what part of each pattern to make what color. So that's still left up to them, still capturing this living cultural practice. And so for the piece that you have in the exhibition, there's 3 empty spaces. So that was what I had decided when I designed that pattern. I removed 3 spaces that they would then do for me. And then when I got it back, I decided to do each one a different color palette, but the same, it's exactly the same composition in each of the 3 panels, but it's, maybe different times of day. So it's different light, and the mountain looks a different color and the sky looks a different color and so on.
I read that work in 2 different ways. In terms of time, but also in terms of the imagination and imagined memory. And maybe you can talk to us about your interpretations of these Palestinian landscapes, because when you've never been to a place and as a diaspora person, you have these
Right.
idealized ideas about them.
So that is something that is kind of central to how I like to talk about the work, because essentially, like I've been going to Palestine since I was 15 years old. And now as an adult, I go 2 to 4 times a year. So Palestine is not a place for me that is imaginary. And I'm very like lucky that I get to go there because I'm American enough and like everything. It's not, I'm second generation. So it's like we're far enough away that I can fly into Israel and whatever. But, I know a lot of Palestinians in New York and also around the world, not in Palestine, who can't go. And over time, I just started to keep having these like interactions with them or discussions with them that made me realize that they really like they have this imaginary thing in their head about this place. Like it's always like rolling hills and olive trees and everything's like utopia and it's like a magical perfect place because it's this place that they're like obviously like dreaming of so much, you know. um and I experienced that to a sense as well, to an extent, growing up because you know my father raised us on stories about Palestine essentially. But when I think about it, I realize like he heard these stories from his parents and his grandparents. And when you hear a story, as especially as a kid, you use your own imagination as you're listening to fill it in your head so you can picture it, right? So they're not going to like literally describe you every little thing, but you picture, you make stuff up and fill in the gaps in the story. And then in turn, my father would then tell us these stories. Um, but that image of Palestine that he was telling us about is not the same image that he was told. It's like the original story plus his imagination. And
Right.
he's telling it to us. And then I'm adding my imagination as I'm hearing it. And so I just realized that as the generations go by in diaspora communities, you it's not only that you get further and further away from the reality of your homeland, but it also, like a more poetic way to think about it is like nostalgia is like it's filtered through these like layers of nostalgia of other people's imaginations and all this stuff, and just as I said gets further and further away from like any sort of earthly reality. And so getting to use that kind of gives me license to use fantastical colors, right? Like the sky is purple and the mountains are yellow, and like it, you know, it's like it doesn't have to be, you know,
Mhm.
any sort of realistic. And that works for me in a kind of painterly way where I feel like in a lot of ways, each piece when I'm like imagining it is it's really a formal thing. I'm thinking about color and I'm thinking about composition. Like it's not at that moment I'm not thinking about Palestine. I'm just thinking about a canvas and a composition. And so if I see like a red thing here and a blue thing here and then an orange thing here and then a yellow sky and then a green sun, like that's about colors and composition in my mind. But then, you know, after the fact, looking at a body of work, I love the idea of thinking about it as like these are all potential Palestines, as imagined by people in the diaspora who like can't go there. And so yeah, it just kind of works, but it's something that I think is common to experience in diaspora communities and like how they speak about the homeland, which again is somewhere that in a lot of ways like it's somewhere that everyone doesn't stop talking about, but at the same time you don't like you could like a lot not with Palestine it's tricky because a lot of people can't move there, but for a lot of diaspora communities around the world, um you know, your ancestors made a choice to leave there, so it's like they leave and then all they do is talk about it. And then you
Yes.
know,
Major classic. Yes.
so it's that funny thing of like being, you know, I'm American, I'm a New Yorker, but I also was raised just constantly thinking about Palestine.
Right.
um
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, so that's
I love it because the thing about time, and specifically, I guess, with night has arrived, is this sense of not of kind of having a sense of time changes through a one day cycle of a day, and at the same time, we're experiencing them at the same time. This
right,
is simultaneity,
right,
and I find that too to be sort of psychically, which seems to be what sort of bubbles up through your formal considerations, is also this sense of time being elided
right,
between, yeah,
right.
even
Yeah,
past, present, and future.
so what I was just talking about would be the first part of that, or no, the second part of that. What I would, what I, so like the talk about all the nostalgia was the idea that like this one mountain in theory could be imagined any number of ways by different individuals all dreaming of Palestine, for example. So that's the one side. But then yeah, on a more simplistic, from a more simplistic approach, it could be like, this is morning, this is dusk, and this is nighttime, which is also fine, you know. And that can be taken like metaphorically or not, and just literally, like I made another piece recently that's going to be in my show in October in New York, James Cohan Gallery. But it's essentially like I was literally just thinking about a field of flowers, but then wondering like what that field of flowers looks like at nighttime, where it's like it's purple flowers on green hills on the daytime part of the canvas, and then the nighttime part of the canvas, it's like almost a deep gray, like purple for the flowers, and the hills instead of green are like grays and like almost blues and like really dark brown, like yellow browns. Because so like, you know, some of it is just like literally painterly things, like how do I depict that with color, and what do colors really do, because we think of grass as green, but at nighttime it's not green, like in our eyes, like it looks it's maybe gray or like a dark blacky green, I don't know, you know. So there's those formal things and trying to just be a painter and think about how colors register. But of course I love this like other level of you know, taking the poetic license and like extrapolating kind of larger larger things, because I mean it really is like, I mean, and that even goes for with a case like Palestine, it also goes for actual people there, like everyone's experience is different, you know, like, and it, when it comes to politics and when it comes to what we should do and it comes to all that, like every single person has a different opinion, even if, you know. So essentially there are Palestinian Americans that I know that I kind of butt heads with on what should we do. Should we cooperate with Israel? Should we, or Israelis, should we know Israelis? Should we be friends with them? Or should we never go there? Or should we whatever? And it's not only a diaspora thing, because I know Palestinians in Palestine who don't want anything to do with Israel. And I know Palestinians in Palestine who believe that we should work together and know each other and like stop hating each other, you know, as anonymous enemies, you know. And so it kind of brings up all of those things where it's about that difference of perspectives and kind of multiplicity, and the fact that like no one is a monolith, and that everyone, and again, like for me making this work is more about, I always try to focus on like the human experience of relating to these issues. So I'm not trying to make a specific political statement about it. I'm more trying to reflect on like, as a person where this is central to my life, like things that it makes me feel, and hoping that that's universal for people, not just related to Palestine, but any diaspora community and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. I would love to pivot a little and talk about technology.
Okay.
You know, kind of like embroidery in the hand, you know, their tools and their technologies, and then I guess the relationship with your use of digital technology, and also just kind of discourses around the digital. Because I mean, I've, you know, in the essay again, Kaylin's essay, you know, she mentions in passing that you'd consider the cross stitch a kind of pre-modern form of the pixel.
Well, yeah.
I love it. I think that's great.
In a technical sense, because it's like, okay, basically, I essentially I lay out a pattern, and that gives me so many stitches to work with, and those stitches function as pixels in that which ones I choose to make which colors results in like a form of a figurative shape, right? So if I make all these pixels on this area green, then that's a mountain. And if I make the next, you know what I mean? So it's, so in planning the pattern, it's kind of a really distinct creative process that is separate from the painting part. How to lay out the pattern, how, you know, where the stitches are going to be in what pattern, or different patterns, or a border, or like whatever stripes of different patterns, or whatever I want to do. And that whole process is done on the computer for me, because over the years, I start with like Palestinian patterns and I digitize them by hand. Like I'll copy and paste, like I have a little stitch, like an
Yeah.
X, and I literally copy and paste it into different patterns and like group them. And then that pattern is like digitized now. And so if I want to use it in a different piece, I can just go into the other piece and copy and paste it and like bring it into the new piece. And so on and so forth. So slowly it's been like building it up, but it starts with dresses I have or pillows I have or books where I'll find a pattern and be like, I want to use this in a piece. And so I'll make it on the computer. And then I'll be able to work with it and, replicate it to make the piece this big or whatever. But when it comes to the pixels, so the computer is like definitely in the middle of the process. But when it comes to pixels also, it has to do with like, if I make a piece that's 8 by 10, I can't really get very detailed with the mountains and a sun or whatever, because there's not that many pixels across. There's like 100 and something stitches across. Whereas if I make a piece that's this big, there's 1,000 stitches across, so you can get more complex with like what you're painting. And so in that sense, especially, it reminds me of pixels in that way. And I can show you here. So, but then the painterly process like comes back in, because so this is, for example, how I'll make a piece where this is one of the collaborations with the Palestinians. So the black pattern around the edge is like the pattern that the Palestinians executed. And this inner area would be the empty space that they left for me to fill back in. And then I act like a painter where I just sketch a composition, like literally with colored pencils. These colors are just for my reference. They're not like the colors I'm going to use in the piece. But so I sketch this and then I just basically follow it like a pattern where I'll do this color, whatever color the sky is, I'll do until I hit the line, and so on and so forth, like the whole way, and then start it on the next color and so on and so forth. But this is like, wouldn't be possible without the computer.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good use of another tool. But you also leave room, right, for your own intuition and freedom to move beyond the initial drawing.
Oh yeah, like these drawings are all sketches. Like
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't, this piece is not currently in my studio. This is like an older one, an older drawing from a few months ago. But essentially, like maybe I added another little mountain here, or maybe I highlighted this with like a little shadow, or like, I don't know, like all sorts of stuff is like, like, it's open, and I can decide to like also ignore something I drew on there and just make the whole area one color or whatever. Like I feel it out composition wise as I'm going. And sometimes I'll be like, I need one more color here. Like there just needs to be something else going on there or stuff like that. And that's where like the practice comes in, where just being able to freestyle with something that took years. And I think is also what helps make it really feel like this is like my medium for painting, because I feel like I now know how to basically manipulate it like exactly how I want. And that's really like when it comes to craft, like that's the goal, right? The idea of being like the master of your craft,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So yeah, so these, as I said, these are just really just the first
Like
sketch.
studies or sketches, and
Right.
and because sort of technologies are always dictating to us, the ways that things have to be done. I also picked up on how you sort of break the rules of traditional embroidery, sort of, which is not technically often vertical, and you tend to go horizontal. I mean, I find that just sort of a natural
Well,
extension. Yeah,
right. Well, I mean, essentially, the way that I use the Palestinian patterns is very my own way,
yeah.
because I'll take one flower that I see on a dress and fill a whole canvas with just that flower, which they would never do. Like for the Palestinian style, so much of it is about like, stripes of different patterns and kind of the whole combination and the variety. And so like my use of pattern tends to be much more minimal than that, because I want the pattern to be there, but I also want it to leave room for you to just like look at the colors and the painting that's going on.
Mhm.
And also it's because like different patterns meeting will leave empty spaces, and then that'll make that part of the piece kind of choppy. So it like works better for my purposes to really fill a canvas with an even pattern. Um, but yeah, and that's also what makes it maybe like contemporary. You know, it's not the same type of patterning use as the chest panel of a dress, you know? And that is the one thing, if you look at the black works that I made for the AGA show, I really stuck to the dress. I didn't just fill
Mm-hmm.
canvases, and there's a lot of empty space on all the canvases because on the dress there's a lot of empty space. Like there will be a heavy chest, and then there will be from like the ribs to the knees, it'll be empty. And then from the knees down, there's again very heavy embroidery. So for a lot of the pieces for the ADA show, I did the same where I just left huge empty spaces on the canvas and just did the parts of the dress that are embroidered. And so it really felt like, and to me, it's funny because that body of work feels more Palestinian
Mm-hmm.
because of not just what each symbol is, but how they're arranged is what makes it Palestinian. And that's because, you know, the whole world, almost everywhere in the world has a cross-stitch embroidery, like
Yeah.
tradition, you know, but how they apply them to clothing is what differentiates each culture basically. Because like everywhere has like a zigzag and a triangle and a rectangle and a square, and like these kind of basic patterns come up, especially like the 8-pointed star you see a lot in like Eastern Europe, and you see it in Palestine, and you see it here and there. But you know, in Eastern Europe, it will be like a little trim here and a little bit here. But in Palestine, it's like the whole thing, you know? So that's really what makes a fundamental difference and why Palestinian embroidery is so recognizable and also kind of renowned, is because it's crazy amounts of embroidery on each clothing. It's not just like a little accented decoration, you know? Um,
And
yeah.
yeah, and I was curious about the cotton that you're using, you know, sort of the backing and like yes, yes.
So this is actually a fabric that I get in Palestine, Israel. That is just a simple even weave cotton. They refer to it as a cheesecloth, but this is way too thick
It's
to
quite,
use as a cheesecloth. But that's what they call it. They call it cheese fabric. Um, but yeah, I've been using this ever since I did that residency in Jaffa a few years ago. Before that, I was using Ida fabric, which is like an industrially made embroidery fabric that's pretty stiff. I think it's like it's starched or something, but it's like very stiff. It's fun because you can get it in like every color, and so that was fun about having that fabric. But this is like, first of all, I love that it's coming from this land. Um, but also it's like butter. It's so soft and rich to work on, and it stretches really well, and it doesn't retain crease like you know, when you get the fabric, it's like either folded up or rolled up or whatever. And this just like all those creases kind of ease right out of it. You don't have to like iron it and go crazy trying to get out these creases and stuff. So it's just a very nice fabric to work on. And it's like canvas. It's like a neutral background, you know. And
um,
then the thread, as you can see,
it's
um,
also cotton thread.
it's cotton. I feel like there's a few in there that snuck in that are like weird mixes. And that's because I have like, there are places obviously online that you can buy embroidery supplies. These most of this is actually crochet yarn, technically, what you would make like doilies and stuff out of. I don't really use, so let me show you. So when people think embroidery floss, they think this, right? These guys. And these are 6 strands of thread that are just grouped together to make like a thicker
Mhm.
embroidery floss. But when you embroider with this, those threads are not actually like wound around each other. So your X's on your fabric will be kind of puffy and not really crisp because this thread is kind of puffy because of those separate threads. But the embroidery thread that I use is like, I don't know if you can see, but it's like kind of it's not braided, but it's like wound
Right. It's
where
twisted.
it's like, yeah, it's really tightly twisted. And so it stays crisp together. So I like to use this, and I'll buy, as I said, I'll like, there are places online where you can buy like most of the colors, but there's always like, whenever I'm out and about and I come across some colors by a brand I don't know or I've never heard of and I haven't found on the internet or whatever, I always buy them if they're the right thickness thread, because I can't, like, as a painter, I can't mix my own colors, you know? So it's really a matter of hoarding like every slightly different shade or even different batches of the same shade, but they're like slightly different. Like that all is good for me. That's like gives me more things to work with in terms of color. And so, as I said, I'll order like my basic restocks from these online distributors of thread, but then there's a lot of threads in here that like my favorite one. I think I've had this. Oh no, it's this one. I've had this for so many years. I think I got it when I lived in Germany. And I've never, I mean, obviously I have colors that are similar to this, but this is like just like a degree darker than the ones that I can easily find online of this like peachy corally something. And so this thread has been, I like kind of ration it where I don't like, I know it's fine. If I need a lot of it, I'll use it up. But I know that when it's done, it's gone.
Right,
Like,
right,
and
right.
so, and that's kind of cool because it's like, then it's an era of body of work where this color like pops up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then when it's gone, it's gone. So yeah, so that's cool. Like, I mean, I like that about, I like that little,
That'll be interesting for like conservators,
yeah,
in the future, like 40, 50 years from now, who are like, we can't find the same,
yeah.
we can't,
Um,
conserve this work without this exact thing. And they go, on this
the
crazy.
one thing that sucks about that for me is that if I wanted to make like a larger area of that color, I can't. Now it's like I have to look at the
Right,
thread and be like, how much of this is left? Like, is that enough thread for this area I want to do? So a little bit limits, and that's why it is, of course, ideal to have threads that you can reorder and
right.
keep stocking up on.
It's an interesting constraint though for you, as an artist to be thinking that way, like the kind of the scarcity of the
But
material.
that's also what makes it a craft, I think. Like those kind of considerations are just part of craft work. Um, and so like I kind of love that because at the end of the day, like if I made, where is that, like if I made the area that I wanted to do this, I made it with this, you wouldn't be like after the fact, without having seen this, you wouldn't have been like, this color, I wish it was a shade darker. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's fine. Like it'll be fine. Like I'm not gonna die if I don't have this color. But you know what I mean? So there's a looseness to it as well because it is about the relations of what other colors you use and whatever. So like anything will work, and you can make anything work at the end of
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
uh,
Well, yeah, no, that's definitely part of
uh,
that your process. And I get, well, I'm actually with the little bit of time we have left, I'm really excited and curious about your work in installation as well. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what underpins that aspect of your practice. And I'm thinking
so
about like spirits, rebellions, and see beneath our eyes. This
right.
sort of, is it an extension or is it,
I mean, I think the focus for me is always going to be on embroidery and landscapes, essentially. But that being said, there are other times and other places for other things. And I'm actually starting to also work with glass right now. So like there's, things are different. Like other things will come up. I want to do so much. But so like for Spirits Rebellious, for example, that was my freeze presentation in New York. And so that included, so that was the pillows, right? But I wanted to have a way to have the pillows in the booth at the art fair that were the source material for all the paintings that were in the booth.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so we installed this three-sided bench in the booth, which is, referencing an Arabic living room, like a majlis. Um, and then kind of strewed the pillows around all over the benches so people could just sit there and they could sit on the pillows and they can whatever. Like, it was, the pillows aren't precious in the way, it's not an artwork per se, it's more like an environment for that body of work to be seen. And so in that, but you know, people think you can think of that as an installation, I suppose. But so that was one thing, and that, you know, for me, like incorporating space as a consideration is of course very important in a solo show or presentation. And the same thing for Night, which was the ADAA show. The same thing with the table. Like that table was, of course, made for that dress, but also considering how it would be in the booth. And it was made from the same wood. It's like this ebony wood that my friend who makes my frames got. That is, it was the same wood that framed all the artworks. So like the table became like a frame for the dress kind of, and it was also all part of proportionally like the size of the pieces and all this kind of stuff. Like it all has to do with that. Whereas The Sea Beneath Your Eyes was my show in Tel Aviv, and that was a true installation. Like that is like an artwork, that is an installation. Like there's no, and for that, that was because, you know, honestly, when I make this work as an American and in America, and it's being shown in America, or even when I've shown in the middle in Dubai, or not in Palestine and Israel, let's say, I like to be a, you know, a representative of diaspora Palestinians and talk about issues in Palestine and Israel and talk about different perspectives and kind of just open the dialogue more so than like make a statement. So even just the basic use of Palestinian embroidery as my medium is part of accomplishing that, because it brings up the word Palestine and then conversations just tend to go that way. Whereas, you know, being asked to do a show in Tel Aviv, my first kind of, the first step of that process for me was thinking like, well, I don't need to tell Israelis and Palestinians anything about Israel and Palestine. Like that is not what they need to hear from me. Like I don't, you know, they know better than I do. Like I only visit there, like they're from there. And so I really kind of thought a lot about like, what do I have to share with them that like is not, or that would be valuable, let's put it in a positive way. Like what would I have to share with them that is valuable and interesting? And so I started thinking about the diaspora experience specifically. And, you know, in Judaism, the Promised Land, turning to the Promised Land, all that is like such a central part of the Jewish story and the narratives. And similarly, in post-1948 Palestinian culture, after the Nakba, returning to Palestine, returning, we will go back, like Palestine, you know, that is such a central part of the Palestinian narrative as well. And so, you know, as someone who's kind of like, in a lot of ways on both sides, I have family in Israel, I have family in Palestine, you know, it just struck me that like both of these sides of my family and my life are dreaming of returning to the same place. And it's the same place, like it's the same land between the river and the sea, no matter what you call it, like it's one piece of land, right? And for me, while obviously the priority is about how the Palestinians are being treated and how their lives are essentially being ruined by the occupation, you know, my grandfather was there before the Nakba. And in his time, he was going back, he was here, he was there, he was like in parts that are now Israel and parts that are now Palestine, and actually parts that are now Jordan too. Like he kind of grew up and spent time in all those places and finally came to America from Haifa, which is current modern day Israel. So like for me also personally and family historically, for that sentimental element of my relationship with that land, I'm not worrying about what it's called because I just picked, like my grandfather was here, he was there, he was all over. And so, anyway, so getting back to the apartment. So so for that project, I thought, considering that both of these sides have returning to this place as such a central tenet of their like identity, essentially, um, as a member of that diaspora, I'm gonna furnish my apartment for when I return. Like that was the whole premise, right? And so I made the space in the museum into my apartment. Um, but obviously, being a craft inclined person, the way that I did that was that everything in the apartment, everything in the apartment was
Wow.
made in modern day Palestine, Israel. So it wasn't about making a dreamlike Palestinian fantasy apartment. It was about, this was in 2019, as a 2019 member of the diaspora
Mhm.
returning in 2019, I was asking, like, what is this place I'm returning to? And so it included, of course, tons of Palestinian crafts, but it also included like Russian glass making. It included like Israeli stuff from kibbutzes and whatever. It included Ethiopian stuff from the Ethiopian communities that have come to Israel. It included Bedouin stuff from Bedouins that are still living in between the river and the sea. It included Druze stuff. It included like basically any culture, anyone that is there now, because that is the real makeup of this place now. It is not Palestine the way that the stories are dreaming of this
Mm.
Palestinian place. It's the reality is that there's people from all over the world, all over the Middle East, especially, are there. Tons of Moroccans, tons of Yemeni, tons of and so it was more of just like a way to observe, be like, and to kind of take stock of like what is this place now, and so like everything from like obviously like carpets and furniture items. Like I did Bedouin carpets with the Bedouins in near Beersheba. And then I did like bamboo kind of caned furniture from Bethlehem. And there was like some modern carpentry from Tel Aviv. Um, and there was, I don't even know, like Armenian ceramics from Jerusalem. There was glass from Hebron. There was ceramics from Hebron. There was clothing items from like different clothing designers and stuff in Israel and Palestine that are utilizing traditional techniques. Um, there was obviously like embroidered pillows, embroidered little like trinkets, like little glass sculpture by a Russian guy in the market, or like a keychain that has embroidery on it from Palestine, or like little bowls, like what I can't even describe, like everything. Like there was a backsplash in the kitchen that was tiles made in Jaffa, and there was like a little balcony, and there was like all these planters that were ceramic from like Jericho, and there was it was really just everything. But and the caveat also was that I was not going shopping for these things. I was going to the manufacturers or the different little workshops and studios and collaborating on making them. So I wanted to include that touch of like outsiderness and touch of maybe Orientalism, or also like that effect of being a diaspora member who doesn't grow up actually in that culture, where I wanted things to look traditional, but also not quite look right.
Right.
Like I wanted to recognize that like maybe some of my ideas are naive and like from the outside, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so basically everything was a commissioned piece, and to the extent where it was like the bamboo furniture guy in Bethlehem made me like a little table and two stools for the balcony, and he like an example of how I would like alter that was that instead of he basically made like round tables and square tables. And so I asked him to make me a table that was half round, half square. And then one square stool and one round stool. I didn't tell him what patterns of like weaving of the cane and stuff to use. That was all up to him, like his aesthetics, whatever different types of patterns and stuff he usually does. That's all up to him. I just said like make me a round one and a square one and a half round, half square table. So in that sense, like giving them a curveball, but then asking them to still do like their thing, like do the thing that they do. The same with the Armenians in Jerusalem with the ceramics. Like they have tons of traditional patterns they do, but I asked them to just limit the color palette to different shades of green, and especially to focus on like different motifs that they usually wouldn't do in green. Like for example, a very common motif is a pomegranate, which is like a, you know, it's just like a cultural thing, especially Jewish. Um, and they would never do that green because pomegranates are red, so it's always red and like all the things. And so to do green ones of that would be like just something they would never do. And so little stuff like that. So the whole show, but you know, at the end of the day, the combination of like olive wood carved from Bethlehem and mother of pearl mixed with like Palestinian embroidery and Bedouin rugs, like it all feels like a lot of homes there. Like that's what a lot of people have, you know? So there was that about it that was supposed to feel right. And then upon closer inspection, like be like, oh, this is like a little
Something different here.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it was the sum of the parts. Like each individual item was a beautiful craft item, but like six glasses from the glassmakers in Hebron, like the glasses themselves were not like an artwork by me. It was like the kitchen installation was the artwork that included Hebron glass and ceramics and kitchen towels that I had embroidered on to say like welcome in Arabic and Hebrew and like stuff like that, like all these little details. I had artists, friends of mine from Palestine and Israel, both like contribute either artist objects to the house or even paintings on the wall. Because of course, like if it was my apartment, I would have artworks by people that I know. And there were like books, like there was just there's little games. Like I had like a an olive wood like chess set and all this kind of stuff. Little dreidel that another friend of mine made, who's a woodworker in Tel Aviv. Like literally just like spent a year traveling around there, like back and forth, collecting anything and like literally knocking on like little workshop doors on these little side streets and being like, what are you making in here? And like end up getting some old man like I found this guy. There's a guy in Tel Aviv who made like a near Jaffa who makes like little brooms. Like he literally like he constructs like miniature brooms for like if you want to just clean off your desk into a little, I don't know. And so he like made me a bunch of like different size little brooms for like the balcony, you know, but that's just like total happenstance. Another one, there's a guy who works with bamboo in a kibbutz in the north of Israel that he makes like tents and stuff out of bigger bamboo like rods or whatever, but he made me like a clothing hanger for my bedroom. But
Nice.
then I told him about this project, and so then he was like, you know, my wife makes these baskets out of like fig leaves, so I had her make me a couple baskets. You know what I mean? So it's also just like it was an adventure in that sense, where it was like one thing would accidentally lead, or someone would tell me about a friend of theirs or whatever. So yeah, it was a really amazing project, and is actually coming to It's in America right now. It is not. It's going to be shown later this year at the Kentucky Museum of Arts and Crafts in Louisville. Um,
Wow.
so now and that was the hard part, was getting it over here. Now it's on this continent.
So now
Um,
that it's here, maybe it has to stay in North
we got
America
to
for
keep
a
the
little
tour
while.
going. But yeah, and I think it's cool also, like, and I think in terms of actually maybe to end on this note, um but I think that I'm interested in showing it in America because I feel like it's totally a different show in America. Like it becomes about totally something else, you know. And I don't even really know what that is yet because we haven't done it yet in America, and we haven't talked about it, we haven't written about it, and like it hasn't existed here yet. So I'm curious and excited to like develop that for like, I don't know, like, because again, like going to Tel Aviv becomes about a diaspora member going back, but creating this place here makes it feel like I'm trying to bring that place with me more
Yeah,
than, you know what I mean? So I
yeah,
don't know, I think it turns it over.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. I mean, you'll have so much more to explore in terms of in this North American context. But it feels like such an incredible confluence of contributions to that contemporaneity, of the diasporic consciousness. And so if you're bringing these things together, I mean, that really sort of shows to me that again, that plurality of vision, to think to do that, and also to want to kind of infuse your own, sort of hybridity or hybrid approach to, is very apparent to me in how and what you would bring together and make it all work, in a domestic environment, in a home. I find that incredibly, incredibly poetic.
I love that.
Um, I mean, your work is so intricate and it's complex. It doesn't uh, essentialize or oversimplify, that complex matrix that makes up, uh, I guess the discourse that you're exploring in your work. And it's because of its precision, that's the thing that people talk about when they encounter it for the first time, is their eyes glide over how incredibly precise each stitch is and how even it is and how I cannot believe that a human hand does this work. Um, and so it's that combination of the precision which makes it really kind of like uh, this this sort of simple um, symbol and pattern that we can sort of grasp as individual pixels. And I'm going to say it. But then when you zoom out, you do really embrace all of that, intricacy and complexity. And I think those are the tensions in the work that just make it absolutely ridiculously compelling.
Well, thank you. I love that.
Um, Pleasure's all mine. Well, I would love to talk more about this installation, and it's exciting news that it's going to be here, and I, for one, would really like to experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, hopefully, if all goes according to plan,
It'll happen.
make the rounds a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, as I said, like the hard part was getting it across the world to get here.
Indeed.
So now it's like in our, if we can truck it around places. And I'm going to do, the Kentucky show is actually going to be, the apartment is going to be shown as one artwork among,
yes.
Like there's going to be embroideries as well in like a different room. Like it'll just be really live as an artwork and not like a whole show. Which is also very exciting for me. That's so trippy. Like you go in the next room thinking it's going to be like more embroideries, and suddenly you're like in an apartment. So
yeah.
excited by that effect, or what I imagine the effect to be like.
Super exciting.
Yeah, cool.
Jordan, thank you so much
pleasure.
for your generosity and sharing all of that with us. I'm really hoping we'll be able to meet in person one day.
Yeah, wait, how long is the show up actually?
Till the end of November.
Okay.
So
we'll see.
And but maybe down the road, there'll be other opportunities.
No, for sure.
Actually break bread or something.
No, for sure. I mean, of course, if any of you guys ever come to New York, but then I haven't been to Montreal since I was in college.
Okay,
so school in Vermont, so it's
right, exactly.
That was like the closest city to Middlebury. So
well, even it's time.
Yeah, it's been a while. I don't want to say how long ago college was, but cool.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Take care, Jordan.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.